Hello, welcome back to In Conversation With, the podcast series from the team behind the Global Cosmetics newsfeed. Today we're focusing on personal care, a category that continues to grow but is facing a more volatile and demanding operating environment in 2026. The market is forecast to expand to $167 billion between 2023 and 2028. However, just 5 months into 2026, the growth story is already being tested. This week, geopolitical tensions have begun to impact the sector, with Procter & Gamble warning it could face a US $1 billion cost hit as oil prices rise in response to the Iran conflict, increasing pressures on raw materials, packaging, and overall production costs. At the same time, wider cost inflation and supply chain disruption are forcing brands to rethink how they operate and where efficiencies can be found. This raises a broader question for the industry. Could this be the moment accelerating for sustainable approaches? Principles such as reduce, reuse, and recycle are taking a renewed importance as companies look to minimize waste, extend product lifestyle, and manage resources more effectively. So how can companies turn disruption into an opportunity for smarter, more responsible growth? This is what we'll be exploring today. I'm delighted to be joined by Richard Cope, founder of EcoVox UK, offering insights into consumer behaviour, sustainable trends, and market intelligence. Vincent Enaux, Chief Commercial Officer of GF Biochemicals, providing a perspective on bio-based ingredients and the future of sustainable raw materials, and Joe Chidley, founder of Beauty Kitchen UK and Reposit, bringing expertise in circular beauty models and refill innovations. Thank you all for joining me. Let's start with the consumer, because while personal care is embodied in everyday routines, expectations are shifting rapidly. Richard, from a consumer and data perspective, what are the key challenges and opportunities shaping behaviours in 2026?
I spend a lot of my time refuting the idea that people don't care about sustainability, and it's simply not true. And the way I refute that is that we have to recognize what sustainability is. And what I see with the consumer data we have at EcoVox is that people are experiencing climate change, whether or not they believe in it. They're experiencing climate change as an economic threat, and they're experiencing it as an existential health threat. So people care about the sort of putting the eco into economy of saving money. I talk about this idea of the me economy, where people are into reducing their impact if there's a personal me benefit, where, they are sort of, avoiding waste or saving resources and benefiting from that as well. If you look at something like what's happening in fashion resellers and how they're positioning this, that is definitely the way to go. I also see in the research that people are experiencing things like pollution that concerns them about their health, or it being too hot to sleep or too hot to work properly, directly as an everyday environmental threat. So people are more geared up for this. People are more interested in this than ever before, but we've got to engage with people on those terms. We've got to deliver products backed by policies which protect people, help them conserve their resources as well. And sort of the benefits of that have got to be tangible for them at a local level. So I think what we're seeing now, as you said in your intro, I think it is a zeitgeist. I think it is a tipping point. It's not just things like the massive acceleration of people being interested in EVs or making inquiries about heat pumps. This is a moment in terms of that geopolitically, but it's about recognizing what climate change and what sustainability is. So give people things that protect them, give people things that help people conserve their resources, and they're going to buy into it.
And Vincent, how are these evolving expectations influencing demand at the ingredients and suppliers level?
Being exposed to these markets, supplying ingredients and solvents for this technology, we're observing that the biggest brands, they are willing to move forward to neutrality, keeping 2030 as a target to become neutral when it comes to carbon emissions. So PCF of our ingredients is being asked. The carbon footprint for each product is the key target today. What we observe as well is that bioaccumulation is a big issue. So we see the brands supplying the consumers being more and more concerned about the PCF values as well as bioaccumulation. So we come with options like like readily biodegradable products to avoid bioaccumulation, and also with negative to almost zero PCF to help this way. For the feeling I have today on the market, I mean, people are really willing to stay safe on the ingredient side. They want the function to be okay still, but they want to do anything they can to reduce the impact on carbon. So it's about caring about the planet on top of providing the function to the consumers. What I see also is that we are coming more and more on a multifunctional approach. We hardly see ingredients playing only one role today. And more or less ingredients are becoming like typically active fragrances. You see typically booster of preservative being also like solvents or products supporting other activity or as any other functional properties inside the formula. So it's about multifunctional components to save space and to get more compact formulas with less product to transport as well. And the last thing I see is obviously that anytime you use bio-based products, you are not exposed to the same dynamics when it comes to raw materials. We face the COVID pandemic. We are facing now some serious crises when it comes to importing pure derivatives from Asia. So that means anytime you speak about petroleum derivatives or my purchasing guys are really feeling they are like trapped and squeezed between the environment and the complexity of the supply and the fact they cannot change. So people are willing to go to a more stable, long-term, more predictable model when it comes to raw materials. So when it comes to bio-based, we're normally less exposed to the brands at the petroleum value. So that's another trend I see.
And Joe, how are you seeing these trends translate into brand strategy, particularly when it comes to circular models and products designs?
Yes, to give a bit of context, I'm the founder of Beauty Kitchen, which is an indie beauty brand, but also Reposit, which is a returnable, reusable packaging system for the industry. So I come at this both from a product and a systems perspective. The questions that I thought were going to come up really made me think about myself to begin with, and the fact that I've actually worked across many different areas, from B Corp, other certifications, circularity, microplastics, coalitions, policy and partnerships across the value chain. And I think that really where this idea, and I love the title, Predictive, Protective and Planet Positive, becomes interesting, because for me, that's not just about better products or trends. It's about how the whole system works. And that's quite intentional, because the problem we're trying to solve is bigger than any one business. So I tend to look at things from a systems level, but grounded in building something that challenges the status quo. And when it comes to consumer trends, building on what Richard said, if you zoom out, we're operating in a period of economic pressure and global uncertainty. And we thought that initially that was just COVID, but it isn't. That is now, the foundation that everybody needs to think about. The cost of living, geopolitical instability, inequality, the list goes on. And I think there's growing awareness that when it comes to wealth, it's not just about money. It's about access and control of resources and well-being. And people are starting to feel that in their everyday lives and really want to be in control of that, because why wouldn't you? So as a result, consumers are becoming more cautious and intentional. They're thinking harder about what they buy, how long it lasts, and whether it represents real value, but actually represents their lifestyle. Waste is both financial and environmental, is becoming less acceptable. And trust, which is the biggie, is becoming a critical factor in any sort of decision making. But there's also this tension that seems to be happening in the industry, or from my viewpoint, where you have more mature customers are becoming more considered, while younger audiences are still heavily influenced by social media, which can drive overconsumption. So you end up with these two behaviours at once, which again points to the need for better systems and a more responsible way of engaging with consumers. So for me, it's the shift we're seeing is not necessarily less consumption, but it's more about intentional consumption. And this is where loyalty is shifting. So a good example of this would be, with a retail partner like Marks and Spencer's, when customers can easily return empty packaging, they don't just participate once. They come back into store, they stay longer, and they often purchase more, but it's very intentional. And we've seen a like-for-like sales growth of around 40% without discounting or additional marketing, simply because the customer is engaged in a system and keeps that loyalty in returning.
Indeed. And innovation is increasingly being driven by efficiencies, materials, and smarter systems rather than new product launches. Richard, what roles are technology playing in shaping how consumers discover, evaluate, and engage with personal care products?
Well, consumers have got more resources than ever before in terms of comparing things and finding things. I mean, in terms of innovation, for me, I think building on some of the things you've talked about, I think the thing I'm seeing with consumers is less about technological innovation, some of the product innovations we're seeing, some of the reformulation we're seeing, and how that's speaking to some of the values we've spoken about. So I think the things that really impress me are products which tie into that economy concept I talked about. So you're seeing products which are being created to be less impactful, but it's very important they push a message to consumers that there's no compromise going on here. And I'm really noting that in terms of, to speak to Joe's expertise really in terms of around things like refills, where you get brands like Kiehl's, for example, on an international level doing a really good job of, quantifying the financial savings that consumers are going to make by embracing that. But in terms of reformulation, I think some of the most interesting stuff I've seen has been looking at things like waterless products and how they are doing a great job of talking about the fact that there's no compromise going on here. And instead of buying water, which constitutes a lot of beauty products, they're emphasizing the fact that because you're not paying for water, you're actually paying for more ingredients and, something which is more powerful, more active. So you see brands like the Hair Edit doing that in America. You see brands like Enaux doing that from Finland with things like powderless toners as well. So really pushing up the fact that, there's no water, no filler, more active ingredients. And I think what I'm seeing in terms of innovation is products coming on the market which are much more performative, because they're dispensing with the filler and they're saying, you're just paying for the performative benefits here. And it's that kind of reformulation innovation, I think, is what speaks to what consumers really need and what they want, which is great value. And it's, sustainability is a kind of superiority, if we can call it that way.
And Vincent, what technological developments are having the biggest impact on bio-based ingredients and formulation?
For me today, it's about really finding in the formulation what are the biggest contributors when it comes to carbon footprint, the highest PCF, try to reduce the scope 3. What I see, as I was mentioning before, is really that, and I'm totally with you on this, Richard, we have a lot of people willing to combine impact and reduce and use less product inside the formula. So people are willing to get actives only and avoid any kind of fillers, any kind of carrier, any kind of useless product. If they could use like active crystal, active powders directly on the skin, they would. They're just using product to make it happen and to make the application possible on the skin or on their hairs or whatever. So people are really willing to come back to simplicity, as basic as possible, to limit the impact on the planet as well. So back to the basics functions. So make very simple formulations to reduce the impact.
And Joe, how is innovation enabling circularity, particularly in areas like refill, reuse, and packaging systems?
I think the risk with technology right now is that we use it to make an old system go faster. And that's really what I'm always obsessed about. There's a huge amount of innovation happening, AI, ingredient development, personalization. But if it all sits within a single-use linear model, then we're not really solving, we're just adding, compounding the problem, and we're accelerating it. A simple example is refill models that exist today. So many are technically well designed, but because they sit outside a broader system, adoption remains quite limited. The product works, the technology works, but the surrounding system, the collection, convenience, the standardization hasn't been built to support it at scale. So technology for me isn't just about AI or formulation. It's about enabling better systems that move us beyond that single use factor. And that's where I love what Vincent was saying, and Richard, really, around that simplicity, people getting back to basics when there is so much of this technology going around. And I think for reuse systems in particular, it is a traditional milkman model in a digital age. And that's where it can change behaviour, create engagement, and deliver commercial value through loyalty and reward at the same time. So I do think it's a really exciting space if we can all start to work together in a pre-competitive space rather than just becoming individual, really responsible businesses on our own.
Indeed. And sustainability is no longer optional, but delivery at scale remains a challenge. Richard, how are sustainable expectations evolving from a consumer standpoint?
Well, I think it's about firstly recognize that people are under attack. And this is really pertinent for the beauty industry, is all those environmental aggressors we see out there. And as I say, big proportions of people we speak to at EcoVox are noticing they've got pollution, which is making their skin itch or making their, hair itch in that regard as well, or they're being completely dehydrated. So I think there's a real need to protect people in that regard. I mean, they're going to be living in a hotter, dirtier, more polluted world. Now, there's good news in a sense, because the research we've done also shows that if people are what we would categorize EcoVox as being environmentally exposed to those dangers, their likelihood of buying things like refill products or organic beauty and personal care product goes up drastically. So this is something which is going to activate people to buying more low impact products going forward. But for brands, that protective element, it's not just about providing products which protect us, like anti-pollution shampoos, whatever it might be. That's got to be backed by policies, because that's got to be backed by things like electrical distribution fleets and things like that to sort of, make sure they're not being part of the problem at the same time. And then we have the supply chain problems, which, really have not started yet. I mean, the knock-on effect of what's happening with war in Iran, we really haven't felt that yet, but that's coming down the line. But that being said, when we talk to consumers, they're already highly experienced in things like certain foods becoming more expensive, or, certain shelves being, empty of certain goods, or not being able to, pay their energy bill on time or their water bill on time. So that's already hurting people. And that's what's going to drive them to wanting, those more durable products. So products which avoid waste, products which like refills, which do that. So that economy mindset is going to be strengthened even more by those supply chain challenges which are going to come, and the escalation of the environmental threats we're facing. But it is going to activate people into buying more low impact responsible products which are part of the solution.
And Vincent, how are environmental pressures influencing sourcing decisions and ingredient innovation?
Yeah, you have consumer world is a little bit easier. We are facing some kind of more typical activities like patents coating, so where consumers are not really the ones taking the decision and not willing to pay the premium. When it comes to consumer sensitivity, definitely the personal care brands are more advanced, because people don't want to compromise between taking care of themselves and making sure the planet is still okay. So what I see now is that really we have people willing to check. The situation with the supply of fossil product today is really such an issue that it brings people back to the lab, even if they were not planning to. So I see a big dynamic there. So it's an opportunity, as you mentioned. And on top of that, we observe that people are really willing to make sure they will contribute somehow as a family. So we feel that when it comes to the ingredients, the challenge is to find the same function, but also to reduce the carbon impact. The challenge is really to be able, because we are not always dropping the product directly. So some efforts in reformulations are required from the labs, and that's not always easy to make it happen. So I have some example of like typically D5 replacements, better solubilization and dispersion of TiO2 for UV treatment. I have some positive examples when it comes to replacement, but again, it's about an effort. So we need the consumers to feel that they are bringing something, they are doing their part of the job when it comes to the planet. All this takes time, but I really feel the dynamic is totally different from 5 years ago to today. I still feel, again, that 2030 is really a target for people to become neutral. And when you want to become neutral, you still have active and ingredients in your formula, like contributing, like absorbing, like generating CO2. That means you need negative PCF components inside to kind of buffer and kill the peaks driven by the positive actives. We see the most interesting for the customers today is really to use us with a negative PCF as a tool to neutralize their formula, because not everything can be replaced by a non-fossil product.
And Joe, what does meaningful progress look like for brands when it comes to reducing waste and implementing circular systems?
Oh, that's a big question. I'm glad you asked me. We've spent years really, I think, encouraging individual responsibility, whether that's from your own experience as a consumer or whether it's from the brands or the industry, but often without really changing the underlying systems that those actions depend on. And I've been spending a lot of time in this space, as you know, over the last few years. Recycling is a really good example of that. So people have been asked to do the right thing for years, but because the system hasn't been consistent, there's different rules, different infrastructure. All it does is lead to confusion and over time, some loss of trust and actually no real adoption of that particular way of doing things. And I think the same pattern exists within our industry. We've seen, a huge rise, for instance, in certifications, which have been important. They've helped to set direction and accountability, but they largely recognise individual businesses. And the reality is recognising individual businesses doesn't necessarily translate into system-wide change. And we've seen that through the B Corp certification and movement, because the new standards that they've had to bring out recently is because the standards that they previously had was, creating all of these responsible businesses that had a badge to say that they were being responsible, both socially and environmentally, but they weren't seeing the impact coming through. And I think for me, this is where it lies around the system design. And I think our industry in particular has a great opportunity to be able to come together and, help to solve some of these problems. I don't know if I've answered that fully.
You always answer it fully, Joe. Thank you. Okay, so the personal care landscape is also becoming more complex from a market and regulatory perspective. Richard, how are these shifts impacting consumer trust and brand positioning?
Well, I'm certainly not an expert on what's happening regulation-wise in beauty and personal care, but I think from a consumer perspective, what I see in the research, which is interesting, is obviously we've been talking about brands having to achieve neutrality. Now, obviously, we have EU legislation which is going to stop any companies from, using offsetting as one of the routes towards achieving that neutrality. And that really chimes with what consumers are saying they want. When we ask them what they think a responsible company should be doing, very few people cite offsetting. They don't buy into that. They do want the direct action of companies using renewable energy in their manufacturing or in their distribution. So I think that direct action, which I think is going to be helped by the regulation, is something people definitely want. I think that's good to see. I think the other regulatory headache is, I was just talking about the sort of rise in certification and the amount of labels coming on board. I mean, what people are telling us they want to see is they would really benefit from some more sort of unified, coherent regulation around the kind of labeling we see on pack. Because when we ask people what would convince them of a product or a brand's sustainability credentials, one of the things they want is the kind of Nutri-Score approach of a color-coded, single numbered score, rather than having to look at lots of different sources. So that's something people really, really want. Obviously, I think France is definitely the leading country when it comes to this, with, variations on the UK Eco Score or the Industrie Repairabilité or the rating score, which has come in on garments, which are, imported or sold in France as well. So I think people want that. They want that curated, very visible, very convenient score, which, when they've weighed up everything else, like the value of the product, its health credentials, its nutritional credentials, and the icebreaker might be its environmental credentials, they can make a very rapid decision on that. So I think what we need to see is some more coherent regulation around that. I know we have that sort of consortium of brands backing the idea of beauty scores being on products, and that seems to be growing. But that's definitely what people want. That's what people are telling us they want, that kind of curated convenience of that kind of score. So any regulation around that, making sort of labeling, certification more coherent, I think would be most welcome from the public's perspective.
And what role does regulation play in reshaping ingredient development and adoption?
For me, we observe really that the greenwash is still pending, more or less, mainly in Europe. So I like to classify the way you speak about sustainability. In fact, for me, it's like in the Olympic Games. It's more or less starting with a low level up to the gold. So you can become neutral using CO2 certificate coming from Amazonia reforestation program and transfer that to Saudi Arabia. And that's something like not generating trust from the consumers. Then you have the mass balance, which is for me the second in ranking. Then you have the circular, which is really recycled product, second life, recycled solvent or whatever. And then you have the gold medal when it comes to biomass. When you come with C14 carbon coming from waste of biomass, typically, I think the consumers will understand very quickly what we are talking about, because they get the feeling they pay for something and they don't pay for paperwork. So coming with our technology, typically coming from wastes of bagasse, typically bagasse from sugarcane and corn crops, we are coming with real carbon from biomass. And that's, for me, we have to rank the option when it comes to sustainability. So the trust we have and we need to get consumers to pay a premium comes from the way we define the ingredients and what we sell to them. So that's the feeling I have there.
And Joe, how do regulatory frameworks support or limit the rollout of circular and refill models?
Yeah, I mean, Europe is clearly leading on circular economy policy, although we do have that locally here in Scotland too, believe it or not. We have green claims, the packaging regulation, extended producer responsibility. But I think the key point is that this isn't just about frameworks or tools like, an example, digital product passports. It's about fundamentally redesigning the system. And as an industry, we shouldn't be waiting just for regulation to tell us what the problems are. We already know many of them. But I do think it gives an opportunity for innovation. When a problem exists and we can come together as an industry to change that. But progress is still fragmented, with businesses just often responding individually rather than aligning around shared solutions, and leading to try and come away from non-duplication or waste or inefficiency. So I think the opportunity for the industry is to move ahead of regulation and work collectively with policymakers to design better systems. This isn't about blame, it's about maturity on all stakeholders, having a place, particularly when you think of something circular. It's about the full value chain. It's not just about one area. But unfortunately, at the moment, the economics that we have is a linear system, not a circular system. And things happen a bit like a whack-a-mole, where one thing pops up, so you have to try and do something else to kind of even it out. And I think that's like anything in an entrepreneurial mindset as well, where it's about maturity and the emergence of how do we solve these. But regulation always has to be the foundation. I also come back to Richard and Vincent's point, really. Any sort of scoring system or simplicity that you can give out to not just the end consumer, but actually the industry at large, I think that would be, a great step forward.
Good advice, Joe. And to close, I would like each of you to share your top 3 predictions for personal care. Richard, from a consumer and market perspective, what should brands be preparing for?
EcoVox, we believe in what we call a trio of truth. And the first, I think, the beauty industry is going to have to appeal to this notion of the me economy, providing those personal me benefits. So, talked about low impact products that don't have any compromise. And I think a great source of inspiration there would be to look at what the fashion resellers are doing and how they communicate about the enjoyment and the excitement of getting a great deal or getting something that's durable or in that regard. I think the second thing, we talked a little bit today about protection, is this idea of healthy habitats, that what people are really focused on is protecting their own bodies. And we talked about the environmental aggressors, which unfortunately are not going to recede in 2026. So I think protecting people from that. And then the third area, we just building on the previous conversation, this idea of closer communications where people want to get marketing messages and metrics that feel very visible, very immediate, very tangible. So the benefits of a low impact product have to meet with the reality of people's lives. It can't be about some benefit happening on the other side of the world. It's got to be made tangible. And they've also got to feel that this is something which other people are doing, that, if they are taking action or buying something responsible, less impactful, that's got to feel part of a big cumulative communal movement. So I think, more campaigns that do that, foster that idea of, what we call collective efficacy. I think that's something we'll see more of going forward.
And Vincent, from an ingredient and innovation standpoint, what changes are coming next?
It's about facing a reality today. People are calling desperately, trying to get raw materials, trying to import products from Asia, trying to face the price increase, the cost increase. So this dynamic of switching more quickly will definitely be a daily issue. So that's going to be the first thing that's happening already today. I see a lot of companies, also ingredient suppliers, playing two roles and combining the efforts. It's like more or less what you faced in pharma and nutrition companies. You see fragrance houses going to the active business, going to the surfactant business, in surfactant suppliers going to the fragrance business as well. So I see more or less kind of a combined effort to be quicker and to come back with options for the consumers. So it's about combining the effort, as you were mentioning. And the very last thing I see, and it's very simple, to gain trust, we need to come back to the basic and communicate very clearly what we bring in our formulas, and more or less be very transparent with the consumers when it comes to sustainability definition, and as well about the components we include, just to make sure all of them are totally necessary in the formula, just only being there to look good and help the companies to make money on that. So that's what I see.
And Joe, from a circularity and brand perspective, where do you see the biggest opportunities for transformation?
So the first one is system innovation will overtake product innovation. So we'll move, from focusing on what's in the bottle to how the system around it works. That's a real competitive advantage because it reduces waste, builds loyalty and delivers long-term value, not just launching new products. I also believe that the shift away from single use will accelerate. We already know it's inherently wasteful. And I think there'll be a step change in both consumer expectations and also the regulatory direction. And it'll really help to move something like reuse from being niche kind of interventions more into this is a stable infrastructure we're building for the future, and it collaborates across, not just consumers doing the right thing, but brands, retailers and supply chains. And then the last one, which I would have to say, is this idea of collective action. So moving away from collaboration in talking about things and shifting that collective action to being a commercial advantage. I think that's how businesses work together in a pre-competitive collaborative space is really essential to future-proof, not just the industry, but for everything that's happening as a backdrop. And you did actually make me think about the In-Cosmetics global show. I mean, this year it was bigger than ever. There was more companies, more innovation, more visibility. The sustainability zone, for example, has grown from like a single table 10 years ago to a full area which shows real progress, but it's still largely individual companies showcasing their own efforts. rather than the industry coming together to solve shared problems. And I did wonder if there's a real opportunity for spaces like that to evolve, to actively convene, this idea of collaboration and collective action, where you bring the industry together around specific challenges. So, if there's anyone listening from In Cosmetics, that's my call to action this time.
And with that, we'll wrap up today's episode of In Conversation With. A huge thank you to Richard, Vincent, and Joe for sharing their insights, and to you for listening. As we've heard, personal care in 2026 is being reshaped by a combination of external pressure and internal transformations, from rising cost and geopolitical disruption to shifting consumer expectation and sustainability demands. The industry is being pushed to rethink how it operates. Those that can turn these challenges into opportunities by embracing efficiencies, innovation, and more responsible models will be best placed to succeed. We'll be back next month with more insights as we continue to explore the forces shaping the future of the cosmetics and personal care industry. Until then, take care, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next episode.